block of slides, and then we have some time to answer questions. My name is Carl, WB3HAD. My colleague here, Carlos. Carlos is K8CRS. Carlos is Deputy Logistics Officer for Montgomery County CERT. I was recently elected Vice President. I've been their communications lead for some time now, and we would welcome this opportunity to give you a quick overview of our program and to answer your questions, hopefully give you some additional insights, and maybe even persuade you to come and see at least the introductory piece that we have. And you're getting this okay on your camera? Effective commercial communications. There may be a need for other kinds of communications, which is what I'd like to talk at some length, not tonight, but at some length with this group about as things begin to develop. With regard to specific radio communications, tactically, when we are deployed, when we are training, we would use a license by rule type of radio service. That could be family radio service, it could be multi-use radio service. Those are the frequencies that FCC stole from business band, depending on your perspective, expropriated. But those are the two license by rule services that we presently have in place online. We brought the MERS in late September, just in time for that cap shield operation. Our people were pleasantly surprised the difference between half a watt and 2 watts, also the difference between UHF and VHF. We found that in a field outside kind of situation that the MERS performed fairly well. However, that's the spokes coming back to the hub. At some later point, we meaning CERT, the club, the appropriate people would want to talk in more detail about how you get information from the hub out to the next place that it needs to go. So that's another conversation, hopefully sooner than later, that we could have with the Montgomery Amateur Radio Club, with the Auxiliary Communications Service, and so on like that. If a bad thing happened tomorrow, I would expect that the Office of Emergency Management would start calling its contacts both at CERT and in ACS, who in turn would scare up the amateur radio backbone, if you will, which this club is for ACS, and would be able to provide for the county some means of stopgap. We don't want to overpromise, but if we can underpromise and overdeliver, that will do very well for us in the future. Additional questions? Fred?
Yeah, I was going to say, has there been a case other than the Needwood situation and the Sligo Creek that CERT was deployed by the county? And when you, just sort of aside of that with relation to communications, when you are deployed, then do you get issued like radios on the county's, fire rescue system?
Your second question first, yes and no. Typically no. However, the first exception that comes to mind is when we were deployed at the AT&T golf tournament. We were issued the Part 90 public safety radios, the $5,000 and $8,000 radios that the county fire rescue has. We were trained prior to that, admonished repeatedly about the value of the radios, how to handle them, where to take them, where not to take them, etc. So that's the answer to that. There is, I think, in the back of somebody's mind a plan to issue a few of them out to key CERT people, and again, this hub and spoke kind of thing, to provide a limited amount of communications. You were asking about additional deployments. Needwood and that particular June rainstorm is probably the main one. There is one where we were called, but as it turned out, we were not needed. About a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago in March, there was a hotel fire in Bethesda in the middle of the night. My phone rang about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning saying, "This is not a drill, we need you to come to help with a shelter." Apparently we were second or third tier on that call. The guy that should have responded didn't. So the fire guy, I don't know if he's the duty officer or who, but somebody with authority called up Greg, our program manager, and said, "Hey, we need some of your CERT guys to come help us do a shelter." Well, as it turned out, when we got there to Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, where the shelter would have been established by the county or its people, it turned out in that situation that the requirements had already been met. The hotel, through its commercial partners, had been able to place all of the guests that were displaced in that particular event. But that showed to the county, and that got CERT some significant political capital, I'll say, that we are available, we can scramble on zero notice, and we can provide folks that are trained to do a particular task, credentialed and trained to do a particular task with no notice. So that was an example of another deployment. As it turned out, we weren't needed, but we did prove to them that we could get to the parking lot before rush hour in the middle of a snowstorm. William.
Two more. One was during the day. This was back when Brian was still involved with us, and Geraci, and it was at a retirement area. Do you remember that? And the other was low-cost housing in Silver Spring to assist with handling people during the day, and we were assigned to Health and Human Services.
So we meaning CERT, our name has gotten around. We are able to do stuff. William was mentioning the two examples. There was a high-rise building in Silver Spring that had some problem with a fire. The elderly people were out and they needed to get back in. I've forgotten all of the details now, but we were called. We did provide credential trained support for that particular instance. A question in the back?
I just wondered about the possible interface to amateur networks such as Skywarn on Tornadoes or Saturn, the network for that HAMS have to support the Salvation Army, which gives you both local, regional, and national coverage.
As it's at present, we've not employed those, or maybe we've explored briefly, but we've not actively pursued. I would expect that in the event that something bad happened, OEM would make those connections fairly quick. Again, being an agent's volunteer component, an auxiliary, if you will, of the Department of Fire Rescue here in Montgomery County, it's up, across, and down to make the connections. But behind the scenes and in parallel, we can explore various connections. I like to say that handing out business cards is to happen on a sunny day, not when the storm clouds are gathering and the wind has already started to blow.
Yeah, exactly.
Some folks are still
interested in this organization, and also as a licensed amateur, could be a representative on Saturn Net on 20 meters, or could check in on the tornado nets during tornado season, as just kind of a matter of course, and have those contacts available when needed.
And several of our CERT members, Tom W3TDH, for example, is dual-hatted, if you will, jointly affiliated with probably multiple responsibilities. So there are liaisons and connections that could be quickly turned on, if you will, plugged in, so as to provide the community at large with an adequate contact. Again, that hub and spoke kind of thing. You could get connections out to the other spokes, I would hope, in a relatively timely manner, so that the information could be passed and lives could be saved. Additional questions? Hearing none, I'd like to invite you guys to keep tabs on our program, montgomerycert.org. We have pamphlets up here that describe some of the preparation stuff that we would suggest to you. Some of it's borrowed or co-opted from, for example, the Health Department's Plan 9 from several years back. The 9 things that you need at your house. If you are prepared, if you are resilient, not just in the communications arena, but at your house, if you've got those things in place for at least 72 hours for 3 days minimum, But more realistically, as we've seen with Sandy and definitely with the Katrina problem, with that storm, you would need far more than 72 hours. But at least if you've got that in a storage area that's current, that's rotated, that's not stale, then you're that much farther along in being able to provide for yourself, to provide for your neighbors, and to hold the line until the professionals, if they are needed, can arrive and do their job.
I have a question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, after you gave that great summary speech, what goes into the kit that you give out that is so useful that you can keep it? Like you go through the training and they give you a kit, and even if you don't stay as a CERT team member, you get to keep the kit. What's in the kit?
In the kit, we have, the kit is housed in a backpack. It's from the lowest bidder, so it's not necessarily a quality backpack, but in a backpack we have a helmet, we have gloves, we have a multi-tool. It kind of looks like a hammer with different holes in the handle. That's useful for turning off natural gas supplies, as an example. It may also be useful in prying something loose or pulling it out. Our members tend to augment things in the kit. There are goggles for eye protection, the mask for dusty situations, an N95 mask. It's not a N100. It won't keep chemicals out of your system, but it is an N95 particulate mask to mitigate some of the dust problems. What else did I miss?
Flashlight.
Flashlight is included. No batteries. You got to buy your own, I think. But, and store them separately so they don't corrode in the flashlight and it be dead when you really, really need it. There may also be a glow stick if the low bidder chose that as an illumination source over a flashlight. Those sorts of things are available. Very basic, very simple. The gloves that I mentioned are, quote, work gloves, unquote, not necessarily leather. There may or may not be some latex gloves, but those kinds of things are provided as a part of the package in the 20 hours worth of, well, actually Montgomery is 30, but from the basic FEMA training, that backpack is one of the pieces, and in the backpack are those components.
Yes, and then you will have, if you become a CERT member, then you will get the best.
Brad, your question?
When you mentioned the training, you said it's like 3 times a year. How long is the training? I thought
It's about 5 weeks. It's 10 classes. It's one class at night during the weekday, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, and one class during one of the weekend days, Saturday or Sunday. That's 5 hours, 4.5 hours. So you have that for 5 weeks.
4.5 hours for 5 weeks. So it's like,
Yeah, you have 4.5 hours on the weekend and 2 hours during the weekday.
As an example, we have a class starting mid-April. I believe April 9th is the first class session. I believe that's a Wednesday night. This is a Wednesday-Saturday sequence because there is some interruptions, spring break, the schools are off, those kinds of things, and maybe one other pre-scheduled CERT activity. This one stretches to May 17th, which is maybe a little bit more than 5 weeks. But to answer your question, 30 hours worth of training here in Montgomery County, the basic 20 plus the add-on of basic radio training, CPR, AED, and disaster psychology. Those are the 3 Montgomery County add-ons to bump up the time. At the end of our class, we also have a practical, if you will, where the students have an opportunity to demonstrate. It's not necessarily a pass-fail kind of thing. I believe if you participate and you do your job, then you've, quote, passed, unquote. But that gives the students an opportunity, and returning people that want to hone their skills or refresh on their skill sets. The existing members are welcomed and encouraged to return to this kind of a situation, this kind of a training, where we can, or to particular modules within the curriculum that they may have missed or need to refresh on. One other thought with regard to radios, I may have mentioned the licensed by rule, family radio service, MERS, that sort of thing. That's the basic intro stuff that we do. We try to bring the people along. Some people have not seen a push-to-talk radio, period. Some people, it's been a long time. Some folks know it cold. They use it in their day jobs, or they are amateur radio operators, those sorts of things. But regardless of the level of students that are involved, we try to bring them along and get them to a particular level, so at least they know push-to-talk, or at least to listen, and how to speak on a radio, how it's different than a cell phone, that it doesn't ring, that you really do have to listen to it all the time and answer when you hear your name. Those kinds of things are included in the Montgomery County piece of the CERT training, something that some of the other jurisdictions, for whatever reason, have chosen not to do. Additional questions? Hearing none, I want to thank you all for coming. If you have additional questions, if you want to catch me afterwards, if you want to talk about CERT and how Montgomery Amateur Radio Club could support it before the fact, in advance of the